Hi everyone, I've made a scrolling and tiling background in Godot, and I thought I would just share how I did it. So just a quick note, at the moment in Godot you can currently make a parallax layer scroll, but parallax is not the same as scrolling. So essentially parallax is moving when the camera also moves, but scrolling is moving regardless of the camera. Therefore, whenever you introduce a camera, the parallax layer breaks. It's designed for static backgrounds that move with the camera. Instead, I've created my own custom node to fix this issue. It requires a sprite at least the same size as the screen size times the zoom. So if you have a resolution of 320 times 180 and a camera of zoom 2, then the minimum sprite size required is 640 by 360. And it uses 4 tiles, quote unquote, to give the impression of an infinite background. So I've tested this in several different situations. It seems to be reasonably robust, both with and without camera, with camera smoothing and without camera smoothing, tiling horizontally and vertically, and tiling horizontally and vertically by themselves, as well as a central camera with zoom and a top left camera anchor without zoom and with zoom as well. So essentially the way it works is you have 4 sprites centered around a little central point, and you move that central point around. So what you can see here is the colors that I'm going to be using in my demonstration, where you have the top left being red, the top right being yellow, the bottom right being purple, and the bottom left being cyan. And yeah, I'll show you what that looks like. So I've opened up a game I've been working on called Hexapower. So at the moment, my scrolling tiling background node is just a child of the camera 2D node. I've put in a plain white by 320 by 180, which is the resolution of my game, plain white background. And so if I just boot that up now and go full screen, you can see that as I move the camera around, it automatically takes into account the camera position. And so if I were to just add some scroll to that, which is very easy to do, go into here, change the scroll velocity, and there we go. You can see that now we have a scrolling tiling background. And now I'm just going to quickly show you what happens as we increase the camera zoom. So say I was to increase camera zoom to 2 by 2. Oh, it doesn't seem to work anymore. And the reason for that is that the sprite I've used is too small. There's not enough of the sprite to fill a whole image. As a result, what I need to do is I need to go into here, scrolling tiling background, plain white 640 by 360, and now put that in, and now it should work. There we go. So now we're not seeing any of the grey background that's leaking behind, and we're just seeing our scrolling tiles scroll along endlessly, even if we move the camera. And we can also go one step further and also change this to a center camera, should we be so inclined. And then, all of a sudden, it still works. And we have a scrolling tiling background that reacts to whatever we want. But of course, in the real world, you don't want to have just a plain white background. You actually want to have something. So in this case, I want to have some light, fluffy clouds. And there we go. We have some light, fluffy clouds. And yeah, they change as you move across the boundaries. You can see they change color. That's actually just a sprite changing the position of it. So as the position 2D mode hits the barrier, it just moves one sprite width or one sprite height according to which edge has been hit. And yeah, you get the impression of an infinite scrolling background. You cannot escape the clouds. And I'm just going to give a little example here. Say I only wanted to tile horizontally and I had an X speed of about 10. then what you would see is the clouds are still here. They still tile horizontally. You can see I can move along and their colors still change. But if I go upwards, there's no clouds. And if I go downwards, there are no clouds. So it's only tiling horizontally, and it only cares if the camera hits the X plus or X minus edges. And you can also add a little bit of an offset if you like as well, which I'm going to do. So I'm going to say, I don't know, like minus 90 or something. And that should move them upwards a bit. And there we go. Now the clouds are upwards a little bit, and you can tell that they're scrolling in accordance with what you would expect. So there we go. But they're not tiling downwards or tiling upwards. And they don't care if I move the camera around. No matter how much I move them, they're not going to tile downwards. They're only going to tile left and right. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The scroll velocity and the Z index can be changed on the fly, but the texture, tile horizontally, tile vertically, H offset and V offset all have to be done whenever you choose to rerun a new run, if you like. And I thought I'd just quickly record one more thing just to make it super obvious. Of course, the modulate of the colors doesn't have to be what I've shown here. I was only modulating the colors to give an example of what it looks like to visually show how the sprites move around. Obviously, you don't modulate the colors unless you want to, and you want that effect for whatever reason. But by standard, obviously, they're just not there. They're just slowly scrolling clouds in the background. And you don't know which sprites they are, obviously. So, yeah, you don't need to colorize them, of course. Modularization is not set in the example I've posted to itch. So, yeah, I'm just going to very quickly go over the code. It's not that difficult, actually. It's just a bit fiddly. So, let's go into no distractions, turn down the output. So you can see I've used a node. This is to actually prevent the camera from touching it. This needs to be done independent of camera movement, as I've said a couple times already. How much should the background scroll? These are all the export vars I've already listed off. And there you've got the sprites. Our little central point, which is just a position 2D. Is this a child of the camera 2D? And where's the initial camera position, sprite width, sprite height, and whether or not we've taken the camera position into account and the center anchor. And all of the sprite textures get assigned in the ready function. So at the very start of when this is created, it immediately assigns the textures that you've dragged and dropped into that node. And it immediately gets the sprite width and sprite height. Then it says, okay, set to any vertical or horizontal offset that the user wants. And then obviously set to the Z index the user wants. And set tiling just says, okay, which of these need to be visible, which of these don't need to be visible. And that depends on whether or not you're doing horizontal, vertical tiling, or horizontal and vertical tiling. And then it checks to see whether or not it's a child of the camera 2D and whether or not we're centered. And then it positions the sprite around the central points, which is just a super simple 8 lines of code you can see here, where it just takes the sprite width and height into account and moves it around the central position. And in the process, all it needs to do is assign the Z index if the user chooses to change that. And then if it's a camera child, just keep on the camera. And if we haven't set the initial position, take into account the camera zoom and whether or not we're center anchored as well, which is nice. So it'll do all that for you just in this little bit here. Now, this, in theory, should be in the ready section, but sadly, it just doesn't work for some reason. I have no idea why. I'm very confused, but it just didn't work. And then it just keeps on the camera position. So, and then it just sets up and moves the central point around, and because the sprites are actually children of the scrolling background, central point, you move the central point and you'll move all of these sprites as well. And then if we're tiling horizontally, it takes the X edges into account. And if we're tiling vertically, it takes the Y edges into account. And that's really all there is to it. So yeah, not very hard at all, but as you can tell, it's about 150-ish lines of code. It's a bit fiddly. And yeah, now there's scrolling backgrounds in Godot. Coming over from Game Maker Studio 2, I felt it was a bit peculiar that scrolling backgrounds weren't in Godot by default, but hey ho, now there are. I'm going to leave a link to the itch page below, and where you can download this scrolling central node all by itself, and then you can drag and drop the node and the scrolling tiling background node and the script into whatever you need in whatever project you use. I hope you find this really useful, and like if you found it useful, I guess. Thanks. Yeah, bye.